this is probably the strangest presentation I've ever given. Because normally, I can pretend I had some knowledge or understanding of the topic I'm presenting. I might have a bit of problem with the peripherals, social, economic, political, certainly technological. On this occasion, I don't. I don't really know what I'm talking about. It's a new concept to me. It's one that I'm just at the start of an exploration. That's why I have produced a paper which is a monster. It's not scholarly, it's highly derivative, it's personal, it's a brain dump. An op-ed, you say? Ed or ed? Op-ed. In that way. But it's there for you to dive in or dive out of as you wish. This is going to be very personal, so forgive the I. That's fairly characteristic, but it's even more so than usual. This time last year, almost exactly, I prepared a keynote presentation for another conference, the International Conference on Sustainable Futures. And in that, I opened up by saying, we're always told we live in tumultuous times. The times are volatile, certain complex, changing, and ambiguous. And then a certain world weariness came over me and skepticism that everyone was talking about how singular, extraordinary, revolutionary, transformative, unprecedented, tumultuous the times were. And if I heard about one more resilient city or agile organisation, I thought I'd go mad. And I actually put to them, how about if we were thinking, talking, writing, researching, presenting in 1939, or 1914, or 1848, or 1790? Wouldn't we be saying the same sort of thing, if not more so? And really, I started to try to develop rather compasses, or as an overarching strategy with the usual education, leadership, knowledge, all sorts of things, which would take us to fostering creative governance, which I do believe in. But then afterwards, and towards Christmas, I actually got this feeling that something big is going on. And possibly, we're standing at the cusp of something very different that's beginning to unfold. And maybe it's more like 476 in the Common Era. Rome fell and change took place. Or 1300, the start of 300 years of the Renaissance. Or 1517, when Martin Luther pinned up his 95 Theses in Wittenberg. Or 1648, Peace of Westphalia, and we could do with that in the Middle East something very similar at the moment. The Peace of Westphalia after the 30 Years' War, when we started to learn about the nature of nation-states, sovereign states, and the balance of power. Or, I don't know, bring it right up to date, the fall of the Berlin Wall in my lifetime, which was the start of a different era unfolding. And therefore, almost initially with a change of one letter, I've changed the words now, I thought about a new commons sense, a lateral power across the commons of different kinds throughout society, and I've changed it for this to a new sense of commons, because I believe the old world order is badly broken. I think there is this state and market duopoly. There's nothing original in my thinking, there never has been. It's just me reflecting on the reality of things and coming home to me. Not just, oh, it's always been a bit like this and play with it. No. I think that in parts of the world, it's always the state and the market. Some countries with more state, less market, some with more market, less state, and people wanting more market, more state. There's actually a synergy, a symbiosis between the state and market. They live off each other, they breed off each other. And really, I thought we're losing representative democracy, is losing its credibility. playing golf on Monday with some Little Englanders, Brexiteers, I actually coined the phrase in one particular log, I was in a bit of trouble. I talked about the Trumpian Brexistentialism that they caused, which I was rather proud. It got me the whole, which actually was far more important than almost anything else, because they were so intense. Market forces have dominated, so I started to search for something new. And to begin with, I sat down, again, it all sounds a bit silly, but I started to think, well, what age are we actually in? Because people talk about the changing of ages. Is it an age of acceleration? The exponential Moore's law, you know, exponential growth in technology. Climate change with and population growth, diversity loss, water shortage, food scarcity. This is an age of urgency, with disruption causing different forms of competition. And we're actually in organisations, we're having to unleash our structures, unleash our strategies, and unleash our people in a way we've never done before. The common phrase, which I use, and I'm not ashamed of it, is learn to fail, fail fast, fail forward. It's a sort of business school sort of mantra in that way. But there's a lot of truth to it. It's an age of collaboration, buzzword of the moment. Forging strong relationships, but inside, outside, upwards, downwards, in, around. And it clearly is about that. It's an age of responsibility. We've moved through corporate social responsibility, the sort of bureaucratic, clock-sticking nature of CSR, through corporate responsible behaviour, and now, and you'll know far more about this than me, but integrated external engagement is the latest one. Yes? IEE. Mind you, that trust is a thing that I'd link with that. I might talk about that. It's an age of connectivity. I knew Jeff Morgan that was 1998, one of Tony Blair's advisors. He had some very good, very clever people around him, in fact. And he coined that. I love the word, and I started using it. I was a great pincher of other people's ideas. Don't not quite so fiercely on it. Connexity. I love that. My latest one, which I pinched from somewhere else, is connectography. That despite the nation states, you know, all the world is actually linking on this. An age of anger. There's a pandemic of populism. There's a plague of terrorism. There's a global rage going on. This is an age, much more positively, much more exciting, an age of entrepreneurship. Then, and this really is very personal, I've never spoken privately or publicly about this. This is the very first time. I sat down, and I have always said, if you want progress in an organisation, an institution, whatever, a country, community, city, college, even on yourself, particularly yourself, you've got to have a change in mindset. And that's one of the great challenges. Therefore, I thought, actually sit down and think, what would be my sort of progress? It's the first time I've done it. My first one was anticipation. I was a Boy Scout, be prepared. I also, in 1968, met the only person I've ever thought was a true genius. He gave a paper in Oxford, he was launching a book called An Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, and I listened. He used the expression, less is more, in 1968. He used anticipatory design leadership in the 1930s. His name was Buckminster Fuller. And at a lunch afterwards, which I was privileged to be invited to, I was on about my biggest passion in life, which is, for myself, is cities. And he suddenly said, oh, John, he said, remember two things. And they sound very ordinary, but they weren't. They changed my way of thinking. First, he said, everything affects everything else. And second, he said, small things can have big impacts. And it changed my view of cities, to begin with, as complex adaptive systems, which I learned that later on. And it moved me to my second phase. I'm no expert, I have a very superficial grasp, but I really am a huge believer that systems thinking should be ingrained in education from day one, all the way through. The third level was synchronistic, and I went for one of his project management in 1979. I was in practice. I was also Dean of a London faculty, Old Brixton School of Building, Polytechnic of the South Bank. I was the first dean there. And because I was in practice, I knew about project management, like sustainability in the 90s. It's a new thing, and that covers the world and great structures. But we had the first degree. It's one of the few things I'm really proud of having set up. And project management, then which is about synchronicity, but for me, it also linked. I was invited by Singapore to go out there, then it went to Hong Kong, to China, really. It changed my mindset about the bumping together of different ideas from different arenas and coming to something new, synchronicity. Then, the biggest of all came in, I was giving a talk in Zurich in 1994, 95, long talk, and a chap called George Roos, I was talking about taking a longer view, wider view, talking about looking at the driving forces of change, and the like. He came up to me afterwards. He was chairman of the European Futurist Convention. I'd never heard of a futurist, except as an artist from the early 19th century, futurism. And he said, "You're a futurist." And I didn't realise that. He told me to read that book, The Art of the Long View. It took me an hour. I said, "I'm a futurist." And it did change my whole way of thinking. And I said about passion about cities. I linked the two, futures, I linked futures with everything. As people who know me will. I am a futurist. I became Secretary General of the World Futurists Federation a few years ago. They always put me in charge so I can just, other people get on with the work. I was saying this to Neve earlier on, I can just pretend I'm leaving something. And then I'm now, and this is where I'm at the moment, I'm just at the start of an exploration. Is it a change in my and other people's mindsets about comedy? So the Commons transition, in January, I sent a copy of my paper to a chap in Taiwan, Jose Ramos, one of the world's leading futurists. He sent me a paper back for review. He's editor of the leading peer-reviewed journal there, and I'm on their board now. But he had a paper on the third mode of societal organisation, commons. His paper's on commons-based economic governance. A bit wordy, but he's an academic. And it really started to change my thinking. And I told him I'd never heard of Eleanor Ostrom. She won the Nobel Prize for Economics, the first woman to do so, in 2009. And I read her book. It's practical. It shows you actually how to do it, not just a utopian philosophy about comedy. It's a brilliant piece of work. She was a brilliant person. And she's inspired me. And when I start delving, and I can't go on about it, I'm only just beginning to understand, there's a huge world out there. And in some of the cities at the moment, Barcelona, for example, which is cities I'm interested in as a commons, in fact, I'm looking on to that. Yes, cities are the catalyst for me. Barcelona en Commun. Barcelona is run by a political party, Barcelona en Commons. Bologna, Naples, Milan. Ghent is having a commons-based future strategy for its city. South America, often because of the populism and upsurge, they're moving towards it. Parts of Africa. It is beginning to happen, and I'm only just, somebody's sort of evangelical about this, so forgive me. But it's exciting for me to actually start reading about this third mode of societal organisation. I've always been like hundreds of others, I always predicted this would be a century of cities way back in the 80s and 90s. But I don't, Last year, 2 years ago, well, it's been produced last year, I wrote it 2 years ago. I did a Cities of Tomorrow paper for a firm I worked with last year. And I looked back at 60 studies I'd done using futures methodology, because we did every city in Ireland, town city in Ireland, and wonderful. I think Lee was the people in it who did a wonderful study. And they were I call them the crucibles of change, and I'm now applying them to commons thinking. Big thing that did come to me is that it's a world of two currents. There's a sort of dominant neoliberal current, which is the city-states, the international organisations, World Bank, IMF, EU, OECD, and big corporations. and they're operating to their own satisfaction at one level. But growing, there is another current which is beginning to swell, which is at that city level. There's a sort of radical municipal current that's beginning to take place globally. And I find that very, very exciting. Where are we, futures of the professions of the built environment? Exciting times, changing times. There's the book I mentioned to me earlier on. It's a period of fundamental change. Transformation largely through digital, as again, you know far, far better than I do. I've always believed, all my professional life, and I've held positions of responsibility in various professional bodies. I was chairman of the London branch of the RICS, first General International Committee on the Education, all sorts of things in Hong Kong. So I've been a member, it's not from outside. I think they're an artifact. I think they're now an obstacle. I think they're defunct. I think they're obsolete, and they're a problem. I could go on too much about it. Comes along like I'll take the education profession. It's changing. The medical profession is changing, as we all know that. The legal profession is changing massively. The real estate profession, which is my original profession, and I'm going back in some ways to that at the moment in different guides. Blockchain is going to absolutely, radically revolutionise. BIM and blockchain must be bedfellows for you, I don't know. That was a slide that I used when I did a report on the global future of the RICS, which they wanted me to change to be more sympathetic towards them, and I refused, so it's never properly published. But that was the slide, the frog in boiling water, and I still believe that that's symptomatic or symbolic of where the professions of the built environment are in their silos, their self-interested, self-vested interested silos. They don't strategize. Architects, engineers, planners, builders. I know it's you. They don't strategize. They don't collaborate properly. They don't innovate successfully at a certain level. They don't pressurize, lobby at the real top levels properly for the good of mankind, if you like, for the commons. They don't excite the young, as again, maybe you know better than I, they're still involved. And they don't lead themselves. Their individuals might in their own ways, but the professions are not led. They are managed by functionals. Which leads me nicely on to the future of universities. And here, we're all familiar with the disruptive ways of funding throughout the world, technological, egalitarian. I saw that Harvard last year enrolled more students in that year than it had done in the entire 377-year history of the university. Wow. With their mass online courses. For 30 odd years, I have argued for debalkanization of faculties. I was giving a talk at a university 6 weeks ago where I'd been a young lecturer 50 years ago. I made the mistake of saying that as well, of course. You think, oh, crazy, I'm still with us. And they said, you must see enormous changes. I said, no, it's a time warp. You still got vice chancellor, pro-vice chancellors, HR, finance, external affairs programs, faculties, schools, departments. I've abolished a lot. There's whole different structures available to really be progressive, productive, and successful. I did a short report, I did a futures exercise with them. That hasn't been published. They promised they'd circulate it, That's too interesting. We need to really think about it. The watchword everyone is saying is digital. Of course it is. I actually think the watchword is about strategy. The digital conservative strategy. My vision has always been of interdisciplinarity. I could bore you with the way we handle it here. We couldn't change the structures here. We set up a whole set of centres. Very successful. CETA, Alan Hoare was a fantastic champion of CETA. Krug, the best man I've ever worked with, the finest man I've ever known in my life, actually, Jerry Walker, the consultancy research unit for the built environment. So we took our professions, Futures Academy we set up here, We set up a number of other centres. Knock Sink, a huge one, about 30 prizes for sustainable education. Getting really young, we realised we had 30-odd thousand kids from the inner city go through courses on sustainability and the environment in Knock Sink. So we set up centres rather than change the structures, and that was actually quite successful. I'm going to have to speed up a bit. I won't go through the descriptions from that. This is all written out far better in my paper. I always do environmental scanning, and I did it for this paper that I've written. I always get the radar out, and I look around the periphery for the driving forces of change. Real change starts on the periphery. It's not all these current things that are in your face, and it's watching them and identifying them. And I sat down, I promise you, there was 100 in the, I use this, it's common practice in the futurist field, social, technological, economic, environmental, and political, STEEP. And I sat down, I gave an hour to each one, but I do this regularly in my office. So I have files, and I just put them all down, there's 20 on each, there's 100 driving forces of change, which are in the paper. They're not, again, definitive, they are just leads. I gave myself an hour on each one, on each group of 20. So 5 in 5 hours. So it was really just a bit of fun, as it were. But I do that, and I commend it. It's strange how rarely organisations, institutions take just that little bit of extra time to just have the radar on. You should have the radar on all the time. It's not. So I go through social culture. I'm going to just identify one or two. Asset-based community development. I don't know how much you know here. It's a great concept. It's how communities can find their own skills, their own talents, their own gifts, their own aspirations, their own fears. Cormac Russell, who's the world's leading proponent now, we flew in John McKnight, the guy who invented the whole thing in Chicago. Barack Obama was an intern with him in his early 20s. An unusual man, a self-deprecating American. Very rare to breed of animal in that way. I think that that's got a fantastic future. It doesn't happen much in Europe, it's happening elsewhere. Social value, someone mentioned that last night. I wrote a column in a journal a month or so ago. I've been involved last year in social value. It reminded me of the days of cost-benefit analysis and even sustainability. Beware the march of the measures with social value. It's great business. So, health, well-being, happiness. It wasn't on the radar in my profession of real estate until 5 years ago. It's now in the face all the time. 10 years for maybe your professions, 15 maybe. Health, welfare, happiness. It really didn't. Now it's up front and centre. And the well-being communities in the States is something I'm looking at as well, if a possible import hasn't happened over here. Technology and innovation. The world of work. I was saying to Neve earlier on. I won't dwell too much on this. Again, it's in the paper. I'm optimistic, particularly for the built environment. I reckon there are going to be 10 to 20 years of huge employment in a relatively traditional way, to give us time to develop new, in the built environment, retrofitting cities to become smart. I think it's massive throughout the world. And therefore all the AI, which is going to happen, we can handle, and there will be time. Blockchain, you know, it's breaking out, it's going to break out, it's massive. It's going to be more hidden than the internet, it will have as much power as the internet. And again, Guangzhou in China, it's building a nervous system for the city, tackling climate change, sustainable urban development and water scarcity based on blockchain. I reckon I've got 5 minutes, okay? Well, we have to regulate big tech. Economic and financial, likewise. Inequality, the biggest scandal in the world. I'm becoming radicalised on this. I used to think it was just... Last year, Oxfam, 82% of the increase in wealth last year went to less than 1% of the world's population. That's obscene. You know, I don't have a strong play. I've never belonged to a political party in my life. It's obscene. We have to reimagine capitalism. Short term, we have to take a longer view of things. There isn't a shut. The new generation are bolder, braver, more adventurous, more flexible, more agile. Environmental and ethical, you know more about. I'm looking at natural capital approach or mission governance. This is all in the paper. Geopolitics and energy, that's going to be a big one. Energy used to be my top problem 10 years ago, 5 years ago, slipping a little bit. It now doesn't really figure as a top problem, energy. We will solve, energy isn't the problem. The distribution, the ownership, and the economy that goes with it, yes. But that's different. The role of China, I'm a Sinophile, so I actually quite welcome the change in the world order that way. Navigating into the future. Buckminster, who I mentioned earlier, be a trim tab. That's a small rudder inside the big rudder on giant vessels. It's a great metaphor for life. Everyone can be a trim tab. On his gravestone, call me trim tab. Anticipatory leadership. I went to Henley, like every grey, aging charlatan, no longer having responsibility, accountability, or authority. I moved into, I was a professor of leadership. I had a straight face, and then I'll fit through my slides. I had a straight face. They asked me to give a presentation. I bought about 200 odd books on leadership, the 5, 10, 15, 20, 50, best tips, codes, rules, practices. I gave a presentation, the 5 linked literacies of anticipatory leadership. Did it with a straight face, because my own personal mantra for leadership has been know yourself, be yourself, show yourself, be prepared, now do it. Which I then dressed up, all beginning with A for next week. I will finish just by saying, I could go on, as you can tell already, probably for hours and hours. Futures thinking, futures methodology, massive. That's the most important slide in the whole lot, which I wouldn't have gone into anyway. Asking the right question, which is stage 1, framing the question. I am going to land. I was asked at a conference like this, one question in Milan recently for the ULI, what one thing would you do if you were king for a day? I'd introduced land value taxation. It amazes me how land policy has slipped down the agendas of all political parties basically throughout the world recently. So I'm for land value taxation, returning to community-created land values. I'm a value value, so I'm a capitalist in that way. Land pooling, land readjustment, tax increment finance, there's a whole battery, site value rating. It really has slipped out of time, and I'm going to the end now. It's there. I'm predicting a shock. This is interesting. I used to think the utopian stuff of deliberative democracy. Citizens' juries, citizens' panels. Here in Ireland, abortion, it's happening in Australia, they're doing it massively. I've touched on that. I would change education. And then, I'm hugely heartened by the global Parliament of Mayors. The world is increasingly going to be determined by cities and citizens than it is by sovereign states. Through a commons transition, that's my favourite slide that I've used hundreds of times. Sorry, that was a little bit too... No, dead on 30.
Dead on, yeah.
Thank you very much for listening to me, and my apologies for such a highly personalised presentation.